Martin Cross had always believed his life was a perfect architecture, built with the precision of a Swiss watch. The owner of a financial corporation that controlled billions, he knew how to predict the markets, avoid scandals, and maintain a public image of an impeccable philanthropist. On the glossy covers, he looked like the symbol of the American dream. A smile, a sophisticated suit, a charm that hid a cold calculation. But one morning it all collapsed. The phone rang while he was drinking black coffee in his penthouse on the 72nd floor. "Mr. Cross, this is the FBI. We need to talk immediately." There was no threat in his voice, only cold formality. But in those words lay a storm that could bury an empire. An hour later, he was sitting in a dark interrogation room. The agent placed a folder in front of him. Inside were documents that showed systematic money laundering through his companies. Something that should have been impossible. Something he would never have allowed. "It's a forgery," he said sharply. "They want to destroy me." But the agent replied calmly. "The evidence says otherwise. The name Cross is no longer associated with trust. You have enemies among those you called friends." That evening, Martin returned home a different man. His world, built on precise calculations, had cracked. Partners began to refuse contracts. Investors fled. His photo flashed on TV screens with the headlines, "Cross Empire Under Threat." He stood by the panoramic window of his penthouse, looking out at the lights of the night city and feeling, for the first time in his life, out of control. Rage and fear ate at him. Who did it? How could documents he had never seen end up in the hands of the FBI? He dialed the number of his closest associate, a longtime partner with whom he had raised his first funds. "Do you know what's going on?" Martin asked. "Martin, listen. You'd better step aside for a while. This is serious." Temporarily, his voice broke. "They want to put my head on the table, and you're saying step aside?" There was a pause in the receiver, and then a cold phrase. "Not everything depends on me." These words hit harder than a gunshot. Betrayal. Where he had looked for support, he had come across a wall of silence. He had not slept at night. Thoughts raced through his head. Is this the end? Is it worth fighting? It seemed to him that the walls of the penthouse were closing in, and the shadows in the corners were watching him. For the first time in a decade, he felt like a helpless boy, thrown out onto the streets of Newark by life. And then he whispered to himself, "I won't give up. I'll find whoever's behind this." But the words echoed in the void. For somewhere deep inside, he knew a war had begun, one where he was no longer the master of the rules. Betrayal had crept into his inner circle. The history he had thought he had under control had slipped away from him, and all that was left was to move forward into the darkness. The following weeks shattered the fabric of Martin's world, as if it were not an empire, but a set piece held up from behind by thin cables. The markets responded instantly. Galaxy Capital's shares plummeted, a flood of lawsuits, calls from banks with the same dry refrain, accounts temporarily frozen. Morning shows played his photos in slow motion like shots from a disaster movie. Old friends appeared in the studios, each speaking as if they had always known that behind the impeccable smile lay mechanisms worthy of the shadow market. The company's board called an emergency meeting. The glass room where merger strategies were usually discussed smelled of cold sweat and fear. Jacob Stein, a longtime partner and, it seemed, the closest person in the business, looked at him with a regret that read like victory. "Martin, we are all grateful for what you have built, but the company needs stability. You're a toxic asset." "You're using my words, Jacob," Martin smiled wryly. "You're just using them against me." The vote took 2 minutes. He left the room without titles, without an office, only with the feeling of the cold metal of a doorknob slipping from his fingers like something irrevocable. The media dug up old stories, bought lobbyists, shell companies, offshore companies. Some of it was true, some of it was an elegant substitution. His personal letters were leaked to the screens with orders to clean up the streams. The signature looked convincing, and yet he resisted the inner feeling. It wasn't his handwriting. It wasn't his decision. "You could admit everything and negotiate a deal," the lawyer told him in the sitting room, where the lights buzzed like mosquitoes over a swamp. "Admit something you didn't do, or you will lose your freedom. Soon." The most painful thing was not the loss of titles and power perimeters, but the call from his ex-wife. The court had temporarily restricted his right to see his son until the investigation was over. "Leo is scared," she said quietly. "He reads the headlines. Give him time." Tell him that I am with him, even if the whole world is against me. He hung up the phone and realized he had not only been taken away from the company, he had been taken away from the right to be a father. That same night, he reviewed audits, transactions, letters. In the schemes that should have been familiar, constellations of names appeared. Orion Trust, Asteria Holdings, Perseus Bridge, as if someone had deliberately painted scenery on the sky. The galaxy is not what it seems, Martin thought with bitter irony, catching the play on words with his galaxy capital. Someone had found it convenient to stitch other people's trajectories into his star chart. The climax of the blow came on Friday evening. The state attorney general announced the criminal indictment. The cameras gleamed like the eyes of a predator in the dark. In the news feed, his face next to the word laundering. In the comments, the verdicts. And then, for the first time, he felt a real failure. Not anger, not fear, but emptiness. What if they're right? He whispered in the dim light of his penthouse kitchen. There was no answer. Only a shadow on the marble, vaguely reminiscent of a person who no longer recognized himself. The next morning, he received an unsigned message. You're fighting a ghost you once woken up. Do you want to know the name? Martin froze. The end of the act came not with a gunshot, but with an incoming message, as short as a sentence. He understood. The game is played on a field where fair rules are antiques, and his truth is just a shard of glass among a ton of mirrors. They met in a late-night cafe on the Lower East Side, where the steam from the cups rose like a fog over the docks. The owner of the place knew only Martin's name. The woman across from him was no one and everyone at the same time. Anna Reeves. She introduced herself, and he recognized the voice. An investigative journalist, once his harshest critic. I'm not your lawyer or your friend, she said, pulling a small flash drive from her bag. But I'm tired of watching the truth be replaced with theater. You've destroyed a lot, and yet not what you're accused of. A database that shouldn't exist opened on the laptop screen. Black Book. Hydra. A tangle of invoices, overprints, signature metadata. Anna ran her cursor over the lines, and Martin felt an invisible mechanism in his head begin to work. Autopin signature forgery, quantum tag toner. Dates that match your flights, but don't match your phone's geolocation. Someone really wants to make it look like your transactions. Who? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Someone who knows your logistics and has access to your internal archives. Someone who has been preparing for years. Jacob Stein and the legal consortium Halberd and Nash. They created a double of your empire, a mirror system of accounts, where real clients' money flowed. And when the time came, they changed the center of gravity. Martin leaned back in his chair. His hands were shaking a little. Why are you helping? Because I'm tired of writing about chains of lies that never end. You're guilty of many compromises, Martin. But this time your face was simply put on a monster that everyone had grown together. Politicians, lawyers, banks. If you can, cut off Hydra's head. If not, at least call it by its name. They worked all night. In the binary noise of files, in EXIF fields, in the coincidences of time between document edits and server logs, a story of betrayal was emerging. The key was a 7-year-old letter marked privileged, where Halberd and Nash proposed an architecture of responsibility, a scheme that shifted legal blame onto nominal directors. In the lower right corner, initials, blurred but legible, J.S. Before dawn, Anna handed him another file, a recording of a conversation made by an informant at a corporate retreat. Jacob's voice was even, almost gentle. Cross believed in his galaxy. Just draw a couple of new constellations, and he'll fly through the black hole himself. The audience will love the fall. Martin closed his eyes. Guilt for past compromises, old conspiracies he'd once tolerated for the sake of big deals, washed over him. I'm no saint, he said. I let the system feed. And now it's eating me. So you're either going to be her nutritionist or her dessert, Anna snapped. There's no third option. The big revelation came when they compared his charitable foundation's donations to children's oncology with the Perseus Bridge's transit payments. For every $1 million for drugs, there were $2 million for fictitious consulting services in his name. Fake charity is a weapon. They stole even the thing I bargained for least. The hope of the people, Martin whispered. At the edge of dawn, he made a decision. I'll go to the prosecutor. But don't bargain. I'll tell you everything, and mine too. Otherwise, this story will turn into theater again. Anna nodded. Be ready, they'll strike first. The city glowed outside the window, and for the first time in weeks he saw not a map of his defeats, but routes to the truth. Hope in emptiness, like a weak beacon signal in the middle of a storm. The press conference was scheduled for Monday. But on Sunday night, he took a different route. He went to a gala party, where those who had only yesterday been called his circles of influence had gathered. Crystal chandeliers, black bow ties, toasts to the invincibility of the market. In the middle of the room was Jacob Stein, in an impeccable tuxedo, with the same warm smile that had once convinced directors not to be afraid of risk. Martin, this is unexpected. Jacob touched his shoulder. Do you understand what it looks like? It's true that you come in uninvited, Martin replied, and felt the small recorder grow heavier in his pocket. He went up to the stage, asked for a microphone, and before the security guards could react, he had the documents on the screens behind him. Toner markers, signature overlays, an audio file with Jacob's voice. My name is Martin Cross. I was the architect of the company you called the benchmark. I was wrong. I turned a blind eye where I should have asked questions. That's why my name was easily hung on someone else's crimes today. That's how they did it. The room was excited. The glasses were shaking. He knew. It was all or nothing. The guards moved forward. Jacob smiled, but a hard glint flashed in his eyes. This is a montage. No one will believe a criminal fighting for his image, he said loudly enough. I'm not fighting for an image, Martin replied firmly. I'm fighting for a boy named Leo who reads the headlines and thinks his father is an empty place. I'm fighting for the donors you used as cover, and for everyone who once believed in our beautiful graphs. He pressed a button, and the broadcast went live from the backup laptop that Anna had connected to the hall's open network. The journalists received the link simultaneously. Hydra saw himself in the mirror for the first time. Jacob leaned towards him, his lips barely moving. You'll burn with us. The system doesn't like confessions. But sometimes they're the only ones who reboot it, Martin replied. The security guards blocked the stage. Someone shouted, turn it off. Someone else shouted, police. In the chaos, Martin felt a calmness spread through his body. He was no longer bargaining. He stepped out of the role of impeccable architect, took off his armor of cynicism, and spoke as a father, as a man ready to pay. I admit it, he said loudly into the microphone while the spotlights flickered. I made deals that smelled of sulfur. I was silent when I should have spoken. And now I'm speaking. Ask me, and ask them. The police had arrived first, after all. He had been taken away neither as a victor nor as a vanquished, as a man who had taken a step into the abyss, perhaps to find the bottom. In the corridor, he met Anna's gaze. She did not smile. She merely nodded. All or nothing. All or nothing, he repeated in his mind. And he felt his fear recede. A heavy but pure determination took its place. The trial lasted months. Evidence seized that evening and later confirmed by federal experts unraveled the chains that stretched through offshore and shell funds. Jacob Stein and the partners at Halberd and Nash were charged with fraud and money laundering. But the story was not a fairy tale. Martin was also found guilty of some of his own wrongdoings, for the compromises that fueled the system. The court gave him probation and substantial restitution, and most importantly, a 10-year ban on holding executive positions in financial institutions. He moved out of the penthouse and into a small house on the outskirts. The mornings became quiet, almost ascetic. The habit of scheduling had not disappeared, only now it was filled with other things. He lectured on the ethics of finance at a local college, helped a cancer foundation without any PR. He sat in lines with his parents, held coffee, listened, sometimes kept quiet when he needed to be quiet. One day, Leo walked into the auditorium. He sat down at the back of the room, pulling his hood over his eyes, but Martin could feel his presence with his whole body. After the lecture, they went out into the empty stadium. You talk differently, his son said, tugging at the drawstring of his hoodie. I'm learning to talk for real, Martin replied. I used to sell structures. Now I try to build bridges without hidden beams. Are you bad? A pause stretched between them, like a bridge you're afraid to step on. I was comfortable. That's worse than bad. But I'm trying to be honest now. Leo nodded. Then let's start with pizza. No sauces. Just honest pizza. They both laughed, and laughter proved to be the strongest support for the bridge. In the evening, Martin received a letter from Anna. Briefly, we are not heroes. We are witnesses. It is more important to bear witness. The stars were slowly rising outside the window, and he thought about his destroyed galaxy. It turned out that the world does not end when you lose the right to name the constellations. It begins when you finally learn to see the dark gaps between them and not lie about what is there. Morality did not lie on paper in one line. Is it possible to be rich and honest? It is possible if wealth is not only bills, but also the willingness to give them up when they pay you for silence. What is more important, truth or success? Truth without action is a signboard. Success without truth is a temporary tent that is blown away by the first storm. Can the past be redeemed? No. But you can change the future at the cost of profits, status, and legends you've believed in for too long. Before going to bed, he wrote a few words for his students in his notebook. Wealth is the light you direct. It either lights the way for others or blinds you. Choose where to look. Then he turned off the lamp and fell asleep for the first time in years without a metallic taste in his mouth. The world didn't become simpler, but it did become clearer. And this time, without the decorations.